Welcome to Occupy TV. Now, I know that the mainstream media will do everything in their power to try to convince us, members of the Occupy movement, that there's something wrong with us. We're the ones with the problem. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the system, and absolutely nothing wrong with all the brutal murders by police that have been going on for about the past decade or so. There's nothing wrong with that. Or so they'll say. Don't listen to anything that the mainstream media says about the Occupy movement, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with feeling some compassion for all of the murdered victims of police brutality. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, no matter what they say. The entire purpose of the mainstream media is to keep people asleep, keep people brainwashed, and keep people stupid. That way you'll be a lot easier to control, because an unthinking sheep is a lot easier to control than a thinking, awakened person. That's the whole idea. So, if you're not a part of this movement, and you actually believe all the lies and all the negativity being spewed out about this movement, stop believing it. It's not true. Like I said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a heart. See, I got a heart. Is there anything wrong with that? Well, just because the mainstream media thinks so, doesn't mean that there is. Wake up and smell the coffee. They want to keep you asleep. Don't let them do it anymore. Watch this footage. I'm reporting live from Westlake Park, and there's going to be an anti-police brutality rally today at 2. And right now, I'd say it's about 12:30 p.m. And look how many police officers are already here, an hour and a half before it's even scheduled to start. Look at this. Good grief. And here's more over here too. See all those cop cars?
About the issues affecting our communities. We have a speaker coming up by the name of James Bible. James Bible is with NAACP, and unfortunately James Bible is an attorney, and he's having to deal with our great police force in the city of Seattle over the tents. So I'm going to ask Maria Guillen to speak on behalf of the OST, People of Color Organizing Committee here in Occupy Seattle. Thank you.
Hello? How's everybody doing? If you can all move a little bit closer, because we're all a family. First of all, my name is Maria, and I don't speak on behalf of the POC caucus because there is no leadership, there is no hierarchy within this movement, but I am here to welcome you all on behalf of the I just wanted to point out that we invited the community to come join us, and also, like any community, we don't all share the same political ideology. We are not all the same, and we all don't share the same similar class struggles. So let's not homogenize people of color, and let's not homogenize and assume that we're all also united, because we're not. And so this points out, and so also we are building this movement. We don't know how this movement is gonna look, so we ask you all to please be part of that, be part of the movement building. And something that the POC caucus wanted to read to you all is on Wednesday, we passed a declaration in support of Indigenous people. So I am gonna read that declaration, and we ask you all to bear witness and to please listen. Affirmation Association of Decolonization of Seattle with Northwest Indigenous People, whereas those participating in Decolonize Occupy Seattle acknowledge that the United States of America is a colonial country and that we are invaders and squatters upon stolen indigenous land that has already been occupied for centuries. Seattle being the ancestral land of the Duwamish and Susquamish people. And whereas the indigenous people of this land have continued to resist the violent conquest, oppression, exploitation, and victimization by the invaders and colonizers since they first arrived on this continent, and as a result have endured a great amount of transgenerational historical trauma and woundedness, and their experience strengthens this movement to expose those ongoing inhumane crimes, and whereas after centuries of disregard for the welfare of future generations and the repeated disrespect and exploitation of this earth, we find ourselves on a violated and polluted planet lacking the indigenous people's wisdom and knowledge to live in balance, harmony, and peace with the community of life. And whereas the term occupation has been used by imperialists to colonize indigenous lands, whereas the term occupation has also been reclaimed by militant workers of color from Latin America, Oaxaca, Buenos Aires, South Korea, China, and among other places to describe their occupation of factories, schools, and neighborhoods to strike back against the oppressive forces led by racism and capitalism. It is in this context that we use the term occupy, whereas the borders of the United States of America are a colonial construct based upon the violent destruction of indigenous land across the continent and therefore illegitimate in our eyes. Whereas this land is currently occupied by descendants of slaves kidnapped from Africa as well as economic refugees forcefully displaced by the forces of capitalism and imperialism around the world. Therefore, affirm that we prioritize the involvement of indigenous sovereign people in the redesigning and rebuilding of a new way of living on their ancestral land in the context that there is one mother for us all, our Earth Mother, and as a decolonization statement to the national Occupy movement and to indigenous members who have been excluded by the colonial language and used to name this movement, it is declared that the phrase Occupy Seattle is reframed to the inclusive cross-cultural term Decolonize Occupy Seattle, to affirm the guidance and participation of indigenous people and to affirm the history of militant labor struggles associated with the term. Awakening to compassion and extending an opening hand of friendship and partnership, we hereby invite indigenous members of the Pacific Northwest and displaced peoples to collaborate with us in this event, remembering and reawakening to our original identity as human beings that is now initiated on this continent and worldwide simultaneously. We intend to facilitate the process of healing and reconciliation and implore indigenous peoples to share their knowledge and wisdom of stewardship of the earth, water, fire, and air to inspire and guide us to restore pure democracy rather than representative democracy as designed failure in governing for collective survival, and to initiate a new era of cooperation and peace that is cross-cultural, intergenerational, inclusive, and universal and practical application upon Mother Earth and the original indigenous inhabitants of this land. So this declaration was passed by the General Assembly on Wednesday, and then the name is going to be brought up again. The renaming Occupy Seattle to Decolonize Occupy Seattle is going to be brought up tomorrow at the General Assembly. So we welcome you all, and the
This is James Bible, President of the Seattle King County branch of the NAACP, and legal redress for the NAACP for the states Alaska, Oregon, and Washington. And what I'm here to tell you is, as a civil and human rights organization, one of the largest and oldest civil and human rights organizations in this nation, we can't help but be present when anybody is standing up for democracy and human rights. We can't help but stand with those who are standing so proudly and so loudly and so consistently and saying that corporations are not people. People are people. We have to support those that are in a place where they will put the human condition before some product. We have to stand with those that look at things and say, we're not going to allow the exploitation of labor. We're going to allow for an equal distribution of wealth. We're not going to be in a place where the 1% works 1% of the time and collects 99% of the wealth, while the poorest of the poor work 99% of the time and collect less than 1% of the wealth. We're not going to stand in that sort sort of place. Langston Hughes, one of my favorite poets ever, wrote that justice is a blind goddess, is a fact to which we blacks are wise. Her bandages hide two festering sores that once perhaps were eyes. Now he said that when he wrote that when he was thinking about social conditions of the 20s. But what I can tell you is that many things have not changed in our society since then. What I can tell you is that the powerful find a way to perpetuate their power at the expense of the masses. That ultimately that poem is applicable to anybody that's in any sort of position where they have been traditionally left out and isolated from opportunity. So when we stand here today, we have to think about not only Wall Street, but what we are prepared to sacrifice for justice. What are we prepared to sacrifice? Because there's been a lot of dependence built into our society. Few people know how to grow their own food. Few people know how to make their own clothes. These are things that you will need to learn and I'll need to learn as well if we're truly going to stand up to corporations and the harm that they do. It is also critical to note that as we stand here as the 99%, to others around the world we represent the 1%. And as we think about that, I hope that we all remember that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So what we need to do is unite with our brothers and sisters in Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, all over the land that are in similar circumstances. Our Constitution, in spite of what many may think, allow us to stand here and raise our voices and say what we feel and to vote them out and to stomp them out and to stand up. Our Constitution requires that. Our forefathers, and I use that term loosely, given that they would have thought of me as 3/5 of a person, and I probably couldn't have been up here. Probably couldn't have. Our Constitution and those forefathers even still would have said, how could you say a business is a person? How could you say that? It is time to take a stand for people that can't be here today, for people that are working 80 hours a week for almost nothing, for people who don't have enough to feed their kids, for those who are afraid to go to the doctor because of immigration or a bill that's too big or whatever it may be. It's time to stand up and say that we no longer have borders that have been traditionally drawn by the powerful. It's time to stand up and say that at this stage, at this time, in this place, we are gonna believe that there's one society. It's the human society. It has no boundary. It has no boundary. We're not gonna be in a place where we don't undo our past wrongs. We're not gonna be in a place where we don't decide that we are gonna heal what's been broken. We're not gonna be in a place where we decide that we don't need reparations because it's been so long ago. Because reparations are necessary. We're not gonna be in a place, Eddie Rye, we're not gonna be in a place where when people work hard and get trained and get certified, they're not able to get jobs, they're not able to work, they're discriminated against. We're not going to forget that a study from the Seattle Office of Civil Rights that just came out yesterday said that 70% of the time African Americans are discriminated against when going to get housing. More than any other population.